So anyway, with this, we finished the presentations. We will have, in addition to that, later some comments by Fyodor. But before that, I would like to ask the audience if you have any questions so far, comprehension questions or discussion questions to the presenters. I don't see anything in the chat, so...
Yes, I have a question, if you don't mind.
Yes, can you introduce yourself?
I am OBK Kingston, Graduate School of Global Environmental Studies. Yeah, first of all, I would like to thank all the speakers for their presentations. Very well said and optimistic. But it feels like with all the talk of renewable energy and industry reducing all of the GHGs released from all of these sectors of the economy seems to be like what is necessary to achieve carbon neutrality or net zero by 2050 being like the end goal. But there is a particular sector of the economy, of all the economies, that feels like being forgotten, even though the IPCC have declared it as a problem. And that is the agriculture sector, which is said to directly account for about 17% HGs released globally. Now, the agriculture sector is known to also account for the release of nitrous oxides due to the use of fertilizers, manure, and even grazing animals such as cattle, which in Japan alone accounts for 10% of the emissions from the agriculture sector. So this is a problem, and this, of course, is very difficult to quantify, unlike, let's say, the power sectors or the transportation sectors, which are a lot easier to quantify and make general estimates as to how much is being released per nation, right? But when it comes to the agriculture sector, it's almost like it's more or less forgotten. Like in Japan alone, it's very easy to spot a house where at the backyard, someone has paddy fields. And we all know that paddy fields release methane gas, which is more potent than carbon dioxide as a GHG. So my question to all the speakers is, because yeah, nobody actually said anything about agriculture, despite all the declarations and pledges made by governments, especially the higher emitters with regards to reducing GHGs and achieving carbon neutrality by certain ages like 2050 for Japan, 2060 for China. So my question to them is, don't you also think that this is a problem? And if it's necessary to also seriously consider how best to reduce GHGs in the agriculture sector in order to achieve these pledges for carbon neutrality. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So let's go to our speakers, starting with Kazuki Hao. So if you have any ideas about this, how to answer the question.
Yeah, thank you very much for your question. And indeed, I think you're right. And agriculture sector is, of course, every industry sector or the sectors should be considered in terms of this the target of net zero. And the latter half part of your question, how to change the agriculture sector to more carbon neutral is a difficult question, but and maybe other speakers have answer or ideas. But from my point of view, my opinion, based on my study in Vietnamese agriculture, is that the knowledge or the regulations structure is quite difficult to manage the agricultural sector in the developing countries, because not often policy from the central government is to be executed perfectly in local firms. So this kind of leadership or the system of regulation should be targeted and analyzed is one key, especially for the developing countries. This is my own opinion, and maybe other speakers have some answers or ideas.
I can go. Thank you for the very nice point. Yes, you have to look at the profile of the country. You know, Japan, like I say, 90% of our GHG are CO2, and among those, 90% are energy related. That's why we always talk about, energy, how to, solve this problem. But if you look at the countries like New Zealand, there are lots of methane gas coming from the, sheep and the cows. So you have to look at the, what kind of emission source is there from your country. And talking about, what could be the effective measures for agriculture? Agriculture and forestry sectors are very difficult to calculate. That's one of maybe the technical reason that people don't talk about too much. Calculating gasoline, how many liters of gasoline burned, and then calculate CO2 is very easy. But calculating a carbon offset mechanism from the carbon sink, or even the ocean, or forestry, or the agriculture is really difficult. So that's why that's one of the reasons. But one recent movement that might be contribute agriculture is a lifestyle change. So in order to achieve zero carbon, which is very ambitious, only the large infrastructure wouldn't do. So each of us have to change our lifestyle. And there are many menus for lifestyle, how you can reduce emissions by changing your attitude or lifestyle. One of them is like, changing meat to vegetarian, or choosing more organic products and such. So promoting from those, very everyday life thing, which we eat every day. And, so that might be one approach. Yeah, that's all I can say for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Lee, do you have anything?
Okay, thank you for your question. It's quite interesting because for me, I just know that for China, the general approach to achieve the net zero target is to change the fossil fuels to change the fossil fuels as power into the electricity. The Chinese idea is like, if we use the electricity as powers, like the electric mobiles or the electric cars or the others, and the industry, they will change their ideas on their fossil fuels. They might give up their fossil fuels. So for your question, you said that the agriculture. I don't know too much about Japan, so I would explain it to you with the China's cases. And in China, there are in some provinces, they are trying to apply their photovoltaic, their PV panels into their agriculture, like to use their PV panels into their fish farms, so that it's like a independent system to provide the electricity by themselves and to provide power for the fishing or the cleaning, like these kinds of the cases. And in the Western also of China, some scientists, they are trying to apply the PV panels into the grassland, because in the northern of China, there are some deserts. So if China, some researchers, they are trying to how to decrease the sand, the desert, and with the help of the PV panels. So I didn't mention any points in my presentations about the agricultures, because the core idea for Chinese government, they want to change like the power and the fuels first. They want to change the industrialize the models, not just use the fossil fuels. So that's my answers. I'm not sure it is okay. So yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Yes. Is it okay, these answers?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. I think you raised a very important issue, which is about the so-called hard to decarbonize sectors. In all this discussion about decarbonization or net zero, we have some sectors like the electricity sector, where, for example, we can expand the share of renewable energy. And this, to a certain extent, may be a solution. But for other sectors, like you mentioned, the agricultural sector or industry sector, obviously these sectors are more difficult, and we need some different solutions. But I think some of the speakers mentioned some solutions. And actually, through the chat, I received another question about the so-called difficult to decarbonize sectors. The question is from a participant from Germany, who is asking about the building and mobility sectors. Again, I suppose this is to all speakers, if you have any.
Okay, so thank you very much for your question on building and mobility sector. I think from the discussion, the previous question from on agriculture, these two sectors are more or less easier to calculate. Meanwhile, I think that these two sectors have difficulties in changing completely. So, for example, like building is something you build, and then that building stay there for like about 50 years or longer. And then if it is not zero carbon ready building, then the kind of building is making difficult to achieve the carbon neutrality. And the same thing can be said to the mobility sector, that for example, the government set rule to replace all the cars to be sold for the electric and like a carbon neutral car, so to say. But still, at that moment, there is a lot of carbon producing cars in the country. So it is very difficult to replace all the previous buildings and mobility tools. So this is, I think, the difficult point for your questions questioning sectors.
Yeah, I can add a little bit more. Yeah, for the housings, actually, it's relatively easy to do at the local government level, and it's kind of one of the emphasis for the long-term roadmap to do something for the next 5-10 years. And Japan promotes or puts lots of subsidy for so-called zero emission house, we call ZECHI, or zero emission building, or ZEBU. So for those housing, try to be offsetting zero, and yeah, those are expanding. In terms of mobility, which is beyond local government level, and yes, country promotes electrical vehicle, also the hydrogen, but this cannot be done, expansion cannot be done at the individual level or the local level. Also, even you use electrical vehicles, still only 20% of the energy in Japan are just clean, and you rest of the 80% is same as burning the fossil fuel. So for the mobility, you need very kind of innovation, technological advancement, and countries' initiative. Yes, that's all I can say for now. Thank you.
Ms. Lee, do you have something to say about this?
I will compliment some about the Chinese, and for the question is about the building and the mobile sectors. Mobility sectors are one approach for the mobility sectors. Chinese want to use their electricity cars, replace all the cars with their traditional fossil fuels, like they're powered by the oil. And for the buildings, I have no more answers for this. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think you offered some insights to answer the question. I just want to add that usually when you have a roadmap or scenario, in this roadmap, it should be written about certain policies that, for example, encourage the movement to zero carbon buildings or to electric vehicles. And some countries have, for example, certain intermediate targets until this year, how much they want to increase the proportion of electric vehicles or these zero emission houses. So, yeah. Okay. So, any other questions?
I have questions.
Yes, please.
So thank you for today's presentations. My name is Nozomi from Doshichi University. I'm an undergraduate student in political science. And firstly, in the second presentation, it is said in Japan, Kyushu is leading in taking an action on climate change. And it was quite interesting because I've never thought about regional differences within Japan. So my question is there some specific reason why Kyushu is more proactive in taking action on climate change? And secondly, during third presentation, there was a survey about enterprises' perspective on who should take an action on climate change. And I was kind of surprised when I saw in the category of people, it was only 1%, if my memory is correct. And so I was wondering how they conducted a survey. They needed to choose only one actor, or they just don't think people should do something on climate change? Those are my questions. Okay.
Thank you. I think Junko-san and Lee-san, could you please answer briefly?
Yeah, why Kyushu? Yeah, so actually, Kyushu has been experiencing lots of natural disaster, torrential rains and typhoons recently. I think this kind of moved the local governments people, or even just the people, really realize we have to take some actions. So every municipality or people I talk to, they talk about how serious that, it has been giving damage economically, socially. So maybe they stood up. And also there are lots of potentials for renewables. There are 3 regions have big potential: Tohoku and Hokkaido and Kyushu. And yes, so many operators want to operate more solars, more wind powers, but there is a kind of bottleneck of the infrastructure. This is not, so the local energy producing Kyushu has to be kind of distributed within the Kyushu. And so the Kyushu electric power has to sometimes stop even the renewables for solar because too much supply. But the Kyushu only accounts 10% of the population, basically 10% of the Japan's economy, and about 10% of the emissions. So it's not like big as a Tokyo area, but has potential. Yeah, I think that's maybe one reason I can think of. Thank you.
Thank you. Miss Lee?
Yes. If I understand your question right, you are asking about the data from the 1% people from the
Who is responsible for climate action?
responsible for the climate change action. Am I right for your questions about?
Yes.
Actually, the people I mentioned, I should these people in English, I should it's just about their individuals' activities. Their enterprises, they answer that their individual people, they should take like the actions to do their garbage their classification like the Japan, but there were just like some the pilots in some cities in China. In most places, people just throw their rubbishes together in their plastic bags together. And there is a idea in China that people should change their attitude or their habits about their daily life, so that maybe to have low carbon lives. But it's just like about the lifestyle, but it's quite difficult for the people themselves to change their attitudes or change their lifestyles by their personal activities. I think it's my question. It's my answer.
I think in China, the things are quite top down. This climate action is very top down. It comes from the central government mainly. So probably the answers are more, it's responsibility of the central government. This is my take on this. So I'm really sorry that already time is almost up, but I would like to give the opportunity to Fyodor to speak for a while. Can you please be very brief, because it's already time to finish the workshop, so maybe not more than 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you for giving me the floor, Professor Yalnazov. Hello, everyone. My name is Fyodor. I'm a 4th grade student at GSIS, a PhD student. And yeah, actually today I prepared some kind of like a presentation to follow Ms. Ota presentation about Japan and local climate action. Unfortunately, I don't have enough time, but let me just kind of start maybe from the middle and just to reiterate my main point. And my main point of my comment is that I think that I just want to emphasize the importance of knowing what are the motivations, drivers, and barriers for climate policy at the local level. So I think it's important in order to localize climate policies well, we need to know what are the motivations for doing net zero, and how these motivations can be fully utilized and turned into kind of drivers, and how they can be strengthened. And also, what are the challenges that climate policies have to deal with in the local areas? These challenges should be recognized and ideally turned into drivers for local climate action. And I think this is necessary for a successful localization of climate policies. So for example, even if local government announce net zero by 2050, the local stakeholders such as, for example, citizens and NGOs and businesses and industries, they might think, why? And what is there for us if we follow these regulations and policies? And aren't there any more pressing local issues to solve than this carbon action? So therefore, connecting climate policy with realizing some local co-benefits is crucial for smoother implementation. Climate change mitigation policies can be linked to solving some local issues. And also climate change mitigation can be framed as being able to generate some social, economic, and environmental benefits for the local area. So let me just give you a brief example of Goto city in Nagasaki prefecture. Goto is a city on an island off the coast of Kyushu, and its current population is just 37,000 people, although it used to be 3 times higher, 90,000 in 1960s. So in Goto city, as in many regional cities and towns in Japan, there is a steady trend of declining population. And as a consequence, the economic decline as well. And of course, local government officials realize that the priority for them is to reverse this trend, attract new residents, improve demography and economy. This is what's often called in Japan regional revitalization. And this regional revitalization is a big motivation in Goto to do some pioneering projects in renewable energy, such as, for example, establishing a local energy company called Goto Citizens Electric Power. And the idea of this company is to buy renewable energy produced locally and to sell the energy to domestic customers as well as to customers outside of the city, such as, for example, Nagasaki city. Therefore, this company will contribute to local economy by circulating the money in the region and also creating employment. And another project in Goto is the construction of the offshore floating wind turbine, first of its kind in Japan, which was a pilot project by the Ministry of Environment. And the project was a success, and a commercial project by a private company, Toda Industries, is currently underway to build 10 more floating wind turbines. And Goto City tries to achieve energy self-sufficiency with renewable energy. And furthermore, they also want to sell the extra energy that they generate to Nagasaki city on the mainland to create more revenue. So this is just one vivid example of how the city approach to regional revitalization by doing the zero carbon as well. And the second point I want to reiterate is the challenges. So for example, a big challenge in Goto for the wind power, and actually in Japan traditionally, there is a strong opposition to wind power from fisheries, because fisheries see wind power as encroaching on their territory for fishing, as well as being concerned about the unknown adverse effect on the marine life. So in Goto, a famous diver, famous in Japan, Mr. Shibuya, who is also a director of a company that does underwater construction, has conducted a research in Goto by diving and taking pictures and videos of the marine life near the offshore wind turbine. And he has shown that marine microorganisms tend to stick to the underwater part of the wind turbine, and soft corals and seaweed start to grow, attracting bigger fish. So actually this effect is achieved if this underwater part of the turbine is covered with some special paint, which is also one of the research done by a professor from Kyoto University. And yeah, Mr. Shibuya advocates that the marine ecosystems actually benefit greatly from offshore wind. And he also approached local fishermen, and he encouraged them to participate in the research, which has revealed that fishermen were actually catching more fish in the area near the wind turbine rather than outside in the open sea. So therefore, fisheries, instead of opposing wind power, they actually might consider advocating for the wind power in their area, because it's quite good for marine environment and hence also for fisheries. So this is another example how to utilize the kind of knowing the barriers and actually not only knowing them, but also turning them into drivers. So just in the conclusion, let me just reiterate the main idea. So for successful localization of climate policy, it is necessary to know what are the motivations locally for doing zero carbon and strengthen these motivations. For example, by showing the connections of doing zero carbon to solving local issues. This is just one approach. Of course, there are more motivations that could be harnessed as well. And finally, it is important to know what are the local barriers are. and try to overcome them and ideally turn them into drivers. A good example is Kyoto city in the case of fisheries versus wind power. Again, that's just only one example of a barrier turned into driver. Okay, I'll just stop here. Thank you very much for your attention. Although it was brief, thank you very much.
Thank you, Fyodor, for really nice insights about this idea of turning barriers into drivers. It sounds really like very smart policy. I just wonder whether this can be applied to more cases. Like you presented about one case, but there might be other cases where things are more complicated.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Anyways, so I would like to, with this to finish this workshop, and please let me thank on behalf of all of you, our speakers. Thank you. And
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm sorry for extending too much the time. And finally, I would like to wish everybody to stay healthy and safe. And I hope to see you all again at other workshops in the future. We will be in touch. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.